Good afternoon. I'm here today with Louise Mirrer, who is the president of the New York Historical Society, and we're here to talk a little bit about Silicon City, this fantastic new exhibit that they've got. I was lucky enough to be at the opening of it. I have a whole bunch of questions for Louise, and hopefully you do too. I thought I would start with just a few words to introduce Louise and tell you all about her if you don't already know. And I should, even before that, I should just, how many of you have been to the New York Historical Society or are familiar with it? So think of it as an opportunity for, it's an opportunity for expand the membership roles. So in my opinion, one of the iconic cultural and historical institutions of New York City on the Upper West Side, conveniently 1 block from my daughter's middle school. And but just a fantastic place to go with a host of great exhibits. And as an unsolicited plug, Louise has brought in a team and has herself been responsible for a tremendous rebirth of an institution that I've known for 45 years, but that looks such a dramatically more revived, alive, and interesting one than the one that I attended as a very young child. So for all those reasons, I'm especially excited to have you here today. Now I'll try to shut up and get out of your way. So I guess opening, tell us a little bit about the Silicon City exhibition. What is it? What is the name? What does that name mean to you? What was the genesis?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to thank all of you. I'm going to thank Google, because Google has been a great partner in this exhibition. And though I was saying to William before that my notes tell me to save this for the end, I'm going to start out by saying that thanks to the partnership with Google, we already have 7,500 New York City public school students from elementary school through high school signed up to learn coding. And apart from going through the exhibition, the chance for these kids, you may know that elementary schools in New York City, public schools, tend not to, I don't know if any of them actually teach coding yet. So, so thanks to Google, these kids have an amazing, amazing opportunity. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here. So Silicon City, the genesis of the exhibition, first of all, the name. We've all heard of Silicon Valley. We've all heard of Silicon Alley. And we decided that we would play a little bit with New York's own history in the story and call the exhibition Silicon City, because in fact what the exhibition shows is that New York has been central to the history, the entire history of innovative technology, beginning with what we call the Victorian Internet, when Samuel Morse invented the telegraph thanks to research that was done in New York. So that was in 1839. We really trace this amazing history and establish that for a very long time you wouldn't think of innovative technology without thinking of New York.
I'd never heard the phrase Victorian Internet before referred to the telegraph, but I like that a lot. If it's okay, I may use that again.
Sure.
And I guess, so I'll batch my question. 2 questions a little bit. What made you think, what kind of brought this to the Historical Society and brought it to the Historical Society in your mind, I guess?
Well, that's a great question, because people ask me all the time, how do you get the idea to do an exhibition, any exhibition? And I'm going to say that maybe some of you have great ideas for exhibitions, because that's basically the genesis. This one came out of 2 social occasions that I was present at. The first was a brunch that an acquaintance of mine had. I was talking to a random person, never met him before, but he was actually from Mountain View, California. And he said to me, you know, there's a great museum of computer history in Mountain View. And I thought, that sounds really interesting. I went to Stanford, so I'm always looking for excuses to return to the farm. And I went that summer to visit the Computer History Museum. And one thing that struck me instantly, from the start through the finish, is how much of the story told at the Computer History Museum took place in New York. And then it was probably only a couple of months later that I was at another social occasion talking to Walter Isaacson, whose book hadn't yet been published, The Innovators. And I just, casually mentioned to him, making small talk, that I visited this amazing museum in Mountain View. And he said to me, well, my book's about to come out. And I did a lot of my research there at that museum. And you ought to tell the New York story. So that was enough of a coincidence of inspiring ideas for me to talk to my colleagues and then start talking to people with expertise really all over the country on computer history. And that was the genesis. So as I said, if any of you have another great idea, we're always happy to receive them.
So one of the things that struck me in the exhibit was the kind of unique historical status that the IBM Pavilion at the 1964 World's Fair places in the exhibit and in the history of computing in New York. And of course, I had known the 1964 World's Fair as being kind of a component of the Tomorrowland, a somewhat regrettable movie, and in a more minor way, a throwaway joke in Men in Black.
Right.
But maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that IBM Pavilion and what was that kind of the icon of change yet to come, and what was there, and how did that predict what was yet to come?
Well, of course, as I said, computer history stretches back much earlier than 1964, but it was really in 1964 with the World's Fair. And it wasn't just IBM, it was also Bell Labs.
Right,
but
of course.
IBM had this fabulous pavilion. I happen to know it was the first, I happen to know firsthand. I'm, a little bit ashamed to say because it will give you an idea how old I am. But 1964 was the first time I was allowed to take public transportation on my own, and I was very young. I would not have allowed my own children in New York to do that today, but more recently. But I went to the World's Fair with a few of my friends in 1964, and there were lines, I don't know, we thought they were a mile long, that's probably a bit of an exaggeration, outside this pavilion that looked like an egg. It had been designed by Eero Saarinen, who's one of the great designers of the 20th century. And when you finally got the chance to go inside the egg, you became part of a people wall. You were hoisted up, and someone came out looking like a conductor in a top hat and tailcoat, and you learned about the future. And the future was, it was filled with computers and technology and things that people in 1964 might have heard about, known something about, but really didn't think were likely to change the way we did things. And the purpose of the pavilion was really to persuade us that everything, our kitchens would behave differently. Our everyday life would be permanently altered. And of course, Bell Labs had his picture phone.
Right,
and, the big joke among my set was, suppose you're in the shower when the phone rings. That's going to be really embarrassing. Somebody's going to look at you. And interestingly, we all thought it was a big joke, and we thought it was a big joke. Unfortunately, it was a big joke at the time. They were way, way ahead of their time. The picture phone was a huge flop, although I would say that in addition to Belgian waffles, which we were introduced to also at the Belgian Pavilion of the World's Fair, probably the picture phone was the most exciting innovation we learned about. But we, back to your question, we decided that though we were going to go back to the 19th century to tell the history of computers in New York, we would actually start by inviting visitors to enter Saarinen's egg and be inside the World's Fair. And we did that so that people could see what everyone thought the future would bring. And then go back in time. Once you leave the egg, you do go back in time to the 19th century. And you get a chance to see why people thought that future was possible in '64, and what was possible, and how long did it take before we had picture phones as a way of life.
I guess this is a picture.
That's a picture phone.
So, so you were in '64. You got to see what did turn out to be, I guess, to many's surprise, a vision of the future. But what were some of the biggest surprises to you as the exhibit was being curated and assembled, and things that you learned about New York's role that you hadn't known?
Well, I would say that one of the most interesting things that I really learned was as much about history as it was about technology, and that was that I'm a historian and I run an American History Museum, so I know that Article 1 of the Constitution requires a census every 10 years. And that was, really critical to figure out how to tax people and how to apportion representation in 1790 when the first census was taken. And I also was very aware that at the end of the 19th century, we had an enormous population explosion in this country. But I was not aware that actually the punch card system, which was something I'm very familiar with, though I wasn't around in 1890. But the punch card system was actually developed by Herman Hollerith in order to, you probably all know this, but I did not, in order to accommodate the need to take a census in an era of huge, massive population growth. So I think that one of the really interesting things about the exhibition is the opportunity to understand scientific discovery as a companion piece to our historical trajectory. What also really surprised me, I also was one of the first to take a transistor radio to Jones Beach. I grew up in New York, as I said before, so Jones Beach was sort of like, where you went over the summer, and it was very, very exciting to have this little pocket radio that you could play your rock and roll music when you were getting sunburned on the beach, since we didn't know any better in those days. But I didn't really realize how the development of the transistor really revolutionized the ability for all sorts of things to happen. And one of the discoveries I made along the way, one thing that happens when you work on an exhibition is you meet incredibly interesting people. People in my case, people you wouldn't ever otherwise meet. And I met a guy from the Bronx originally who used transistor technology. He'd gone to City College, and he actually invented this while he was a student at City College. He used transistor technology to develop an instrument called the Cardotron. And the Cardotron allowed a doctor to move around with a cardiogram machine, which was an enormous innovation, because you could figure out what someone's heartbeat was remotely. And in fact, he showed me some pictures of his sales pitch, and I found my own father was a cardiologist, and lo and behold, I found my father in one of the pictures.
Oh.
So that was really
Wow.
quite incredible, who was receiving a demonstration. But practically, so many things were certainly new to me. What wasn't new to me, but is new to so many of our young visitors, was this electric typewriter. And I typed my dissertation on a Selectric in 1980, and that seemed like a huge innovation. I mean, little did I know that 5 years later, I would have tossed the Selectric in favor of a IBM word processing machine. But at the time, it seemed amazing. And what happens is we decided to have a bank of Selectrics for fun.
I love that, by the way. Oh, the feel of that typewriter keyboard is just
Well, what
unparalleled.
happens is that, the most amazing thing in the world to our very young visitors is this bank of Selectric typewriters, and they're waiting in line to have the chance to type on this thing. And as one of my colleagues said, quoted his son as saying, "It's amazing to have a computer that you can type on and it prints at the same time. Wow." Back to the future, as they say.
Where's the screen? I think I heard. So something you touched on a minute ago in talking about the interconnectedness of technology and science in the area is I think there's this theme of the interconnectedness or the role of technology in New York's great industries, right? And of course, New York is great in many, many things, but media, culture were arguably or the greatest in the world. And there certainly seems to have been a great kind of technology component to media, culture, finance, these other New York industries, institutions.
Well, I think that's why New York was so central to technological innovation, because a lot of things were happening here that were on the cutting edge. Culture is really key among them. So, so the earliest experimentation with, for example, music, art, dance, Cage and Cunningham, to give one salient example, they were, really learning about innovations in computer technology and figuring out how they could make what at the time sounded like totally weird sounds and movements. And we have a wonderful little video in the exhibition. You can see they're hooking up a toaster, and I think maybe a blender also to make music. And it's very, it's very funny and sort of Chaplin-esque, but experimentation has always been the calling card of culture in New York, and we have a long history of bringing. We did an exhibition on the 1913 Armory Show in New York, which introduced New York to modern art. I mean, modern art came to New York. It shocked a lot of people, and this kind of new music, computer-generated music, computer-generated sound. I mean, it's no accident that New York is, just a very open city, and the early experimentation really all happened here. And some of the other discoveries that we made along the way were that actually things that are really closely associated with Hollywood or with California more generally, like Toy Story, pixelated movies, computer-generated films, actually also happened here. And some of the academic institutions in town were really central to all of that.
Now, do you think that so having been to gone to school in Stanford and been to the Computer Museum and so on, is this just core to New York's technology identity and a difference from the Silicon Valley one, which is now very, very focused on consumer experience of technology directly?
Yeah, I think I think New York was central for a long time to innovation, kind of mechanical innovation, and then I think I was at Stanford. I was at Stanford at a time when Stanford was really promoting its faculty to do research, innovative research, and I think probably the understanding of how you could commercialize an invention that came out of an academic institution was more West Coast than East Coast, and I think that probably gave Mountain View and Silicon Valley its edge. But I think New York retained, New York has retained industries that make a company like Google an attractive partner for the city. We have advertising here, so anyone who has a business model that that requires proximity to advertising agencies, New York's a good place to be. Culture, the same thing. Certain kinds of culture, maybe not Hollywood film, but or games these days. But I think, that that New York has really hewed, even during the time that we argue. I mean, we basically abandon this story in the 1980s in our exhibition. We go through the end of the 70s, and then we say it moved to the West Coast. We have a little bit on the 90s because certainly the capital markets in New York were paying attention to technological innovation in the 1990s, and then we restart the story in the present.
Well, and the present seems like an interesting time and a bit of a difference. Now there's this, they call it the tech renaissance in New York, but renaissance implies, I guess rebirth implies there was death along the way, and the point of the the exhibit is in fact that was never the case, right? But there's this, it does seem like New York now has a tremendous number of small, medium, and even large-sized companies that are technology company. You know, technology is the business, not just, you know, an enabler for the business or a component of it, and much more mirroring what's been done in Silicon Valley, I guess. Do you see that as a permanent change? Do you see it as a, is this changing the landscape of New York, the economics, the political dynamics? And
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think Google, you know, is a very, very big part of that story because this building has anchored a whole new rebirth. Certainly, you know, you've been part of a whole new rebirth of Manhattan's Far West Side. And I think that, you know, I live on the East Side, despite the fact that I work on the Upper West Side, but neither of those places, you know, really is sort of the center of what's happening today, certainly not in technology. And I think that the personality and the geography of the city has been very, very much changed by the renaissance of technology here. And you know, I think also that what's very nice is that companies like Google and others that have sunk their roots in New York really understand that you can still attract a different kind of person to work in technology at New York, perhaps in New York, than on the West Coast. You know, I'm a New Yorker. I'm fourth generation New Yorker, so I'm very, you know, New York focused. But I do think that it's nice to see that startup technology companies that are, you know, doing really great cutting edge kinds of things, companies like Google, are recognizing that New York really has a special DNA, and that is, you know, it's fun to work here in this city.
cool. Well, I'm glad we agree. Absolutely. So maybe talk a little bit more about the coding experience, the coding teaching that's going on at the exhibit. This seems like a kind of a new thing for the Historical Society.
Well, it is. You know, we were really glad for the chance with this exhibition to talk about science because there's such a focus on trying to prepare new generations for work, for being able to, having the capacity to work in these industries, in these new industries these days. And we have a lot of kids who visit. You have to, some of you may know this, but New York Forever has required, if you're in a public school, has required you to pass an American History Regents examination in 11th grade. If you don't pass it, you don't graduate from high school, and as everybody knows, you don't graduate from high school, you tend to have 0 life chances. So we've been very much about leveling the playing field at the New York Historical Society, and we've spent a lot of time and energy trying to make sure that students are, of course we believe in it, they should know American history, they should know their local history, but they should also be able to graduate from high school. So we've spent a lot of time and energy doing that, but we haven't really had a chance to prepare our students for careers in science and technology because we focused on history. And this exhibition really gave us the opportunity to say, well, what can we do now? And as I said at the start, we were very fortunate to have a partnership with Google because we got expertise from you. So your colleagues have enabled us. We have some great videos which you can access online and have a great time watching.
Awesome.
It's fun for us, fun. I'm sure it would be fun for you too, to introduce very young kids to coding. And you know, it is a skill that is extremely, very necessary. And it is a skill that just you know, I guess they don't really have the bandwidth to do it in the early grades in the New York City public schools. So we have offered the opportunity to any teacher, any class throughout the city in the public schools to come. The students get a guided tour of our exhibition, and then they spend an hour in one of our Google classrooms. So we've got 3 Google classrooms, one very big one and 2 nice-sized ones, but not as big. And they spend an hour learning coding, and it's really a lot of fun. So it's great. Thank you.
Oh, cool. It's great we can do that. Never would I have thought that I would have the opportunity as part of Google to collaborate with the New York Historical Society. It's kind of one of the great thrills of being part of Google in New York for me, I think. I'm kind of out of my question list, and I think would it be okay for us to open up to questions from the audience?
Sure.
We have mics on either side. If you have I see Ramon is bravely going.
If you ask me anything technical, I'm going to throw it back to you to answer. So just as a warning.
Hi, thanks for visiting. You've spoken about West Coast versus East Coast, but I'm also been curious to know if you have insight into why some of the tech industry moved out of New York into the suburbs and now it's moved back, which I think is great. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we actually did, a couple of years ago now, we did an exhibition called World War II in New York. And the exhibition really showed how at the end of World War II, manufacturing, which had been so central to the city and the environs, really moved to the West Coast. I mean, already you could see Grumman and the aircraft industry was out on Long Island. But manufacturing writ large was starting to leave the city. It was already migrating to California. And I think that really, that's part of the story is that New York became less hospitable for a whole range of reasons after World War II. There's more land, cheaper, more energy, cheaper geography, real estate, and there were new industries that came to New York and supplanted manufacturing, like all the culture. I mean, the University in Exile, New School University, for example. So I think, it's very complex, but I think this started at the end of World War II. New York, fell on very hard times in the 1970s. It was really not a great place to live, not a great place to work. People fled to the suburbs. You would not be sending your children to school on the Upper West Side.
I grew up on the Upper West Side in the 1970s,
well,
so I have the scars to show it.
Yeah, no, I remember coming back from college one year, and I stayed with a friend who lived in one of these now glorious apartments in the West 80s, and you could hear the shots ringing out. So, so I think that was part of the complex of things that happened, and that's what happened, changed.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of the skeletons of these institutions that remain, I think, are interesting. So I worked for Columbia University in what had been IBM's original Watson Research Labs
right,
on 115th
right,
Street, and Bell Labs had originated downtown.
Right.
It is you can kind of see the skeletons of these institutions, or they're still present on the streets of Manhattan. We have another question over there.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I had a question about sort of again, you mentioned this earlier, but kind of the reputation of New York versus Silicon Valley is kind of the grassroots support of the tech industry from its sort of citizens and constituents. And New York, for better or worse, has sort of avoided a lot of the problems that have affected the Bay Area with kind of a reputation of creating these little startups that promote either the gig economy, as they say, your Ubers, that sort of thing. And New York has a lot of startups that make real tangible things.
Right.
And I was wondering, in the course of putting together this exhibition, if you saw any sort of trends in that way of sort of the continuation of New York as kind of an engine of innovation in its historical sense. I mean, you just touched on that a little bit, but this idea that people build things in New York that are useful and that are useful to everyone.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And the first question was a great question, too, which I couldn't do justice to. But there are some great books on suburbanization. But I would say in the last gallery of the exhibition, we have a case that has some 3D printed objects in it. We work with Shapeways, which is one of the, I guess, newer 3D printing companies. And I love the idea that 3D printing seems to have really taken hold as an industry in New York, because they are making real things, and it does. I think Wall Street suffers a little bit from the same thing. What's this capital? There's no
Right.
there. But I think that it does, it does sort of return the whole phenomenon of 3D printing and its uses from, I think it's great if I have a dinner party and run out of spoons that I might have to make one. On the trivial end to the really serious robotics applications of 3D printing. I think it's great that New York has sort of returned to its manufacturing roots in that sense. And, I feel that it doesn't really undermine anything about the intellectual purpose of New Yorkers and what's done at various universities. But, maybe that's a way of seeing it.
Thank you.
Hello, thanks for coming. Forgive me, I haven't been to the exhibition yet, so
Hope
this
you
question
will.
probably
Hope you'll come.
belies that. And it's a little bit of a connection to the first question as well. And it's sort of a curatorial question. When I think about this sort of time period of the birth of computing, I think of New Jersey and Princeton and places very allied to New York, but I was just wondering what you decide New York is when you're talking about this. Is it Rochester? Is it Manhattan? Is it Montauk? So I was just wondering what your kind of, when you were deciding that, how did you sort of say what New York was, what the Silicon City was, and how far its tendrils kind of extended?
Right. So, Bell Labs actually started right around here. So we're almost home. We're almost at ground zero in terms of Bell Labs. And ditto for any innovation that was connected. Columbia's Watson Labs, for example, on 116th Street. IBM. IBM's headquarters have always been on 57th and Madison. So New York City. Many people don't know this. They think that Bell Labs was always in New Jersey and Murray Hill. I say Murray Hill, and people think I mean Manhattan, but
Yeah.
there is a Murray Hill.
Actually,
New Jersey
here
and
when you
over
say
there.
Murray Hill, people think you mean New Jersey.
A lot of jokes about Manhattan's Murray Hill, so I won't
Yeah.
go into it. But actually, if you trace the history, when Samuel Morse was working on the telegraph, he was here he was right here. So Edison, Thomas Edison, also,
Right.
All of the early inventions really relate to what we would call strictly New York City. But we're very broad-minded, and we do think that there's sort of a tri-state area that we can claim as New York. So, we do play a little bit. IBM, of course, moved up to Armonk, and then it moved further north, and we do go out to Princeton. We certainly, have gone out on Long Island. So, so we do fudge a little bit. But Silicon Valley is a huge.
Yeah.
Where did it start? It started in a very small location. Now, I don't even know what the geographical boundaries are anymore. But so if they can do it, we can do it too.
Hi,
Hi.
Thanks for coming. You were mentioning earlier about teaching kids to program in school, and I remember when I was in grade school in the 80s, they taught us basic programming, and it was in the first code I ever saw was my math textbook. But I guess that stopped happening at some point. Did your research uncover why that no longer was happening in public schools, and kind of if that's going to start happening again, teaching kids code?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things going on in schools today, and so what tends to happen is have a very prescriptive curriculum that basically teaches you what you need to know with a view of passing a benchmark exam. It's no secret that kids, maybe there's a different, the pendulum is swinging in a different direction these days, but testing became increasingly important. So, I think what happened was that you tended to develop a curriculum that would be focused on what you needed. And there were benchmark exams, really early on, 4th and 5th grade. There always were, but there was a lot more freedom, I think, for a teacher to help kids explore. And that really stopped happening. No Child Left Behind, was big legislation. This, I guess, I'm trying to think. I mean, it came in with the second Bush administration, so not that long ago. But it really did alter the picture for what kids learned. So the curriculum became tighter and tighter. I think there was a lot of pressure on the New York City public schools, probably not all that long ago, maybe in the last decade, to prepare students for careers in new technology. And as a result, they started introducing coding in the high schools because the logic was you're at the tail end of your career in public school, and now's the time to teach you skills that you would need to get a job. But it's actually much too late. You'll all know that. You'll all recognize that. It's much too late. First of all, the dropout rate, even though it's improved hugely, I mean, there's a huge dropout rate. I don't know what the percent. I used to know the percentages, but it's pretty big. So there are a lot of kids that don't, they just don't make it to high school. So if you haven't started them on a, on a path, they're never going to get there. And I think that we certainly think that introducing coding for public school kids in elementary school is a way of saying, stay in school because you're already on your way to a career. And I think basically that's, I could go on and on talking about it because it's sort of a hobby horse, but we feel very, very strongly that this is, one of the greatest things that we can do is to give a New York City public school, and most of the kids who come to us are free lunch, free breakfast kids. So, so they're really getting an experience that you would get, as a matter of course, in a private school, but you would not get in public school.
If you're also interested in learning more about what Google's doing, there are K-12 programs run out of NGDU that are done here in the New York office, and I'm sure it'd be easy to connect you with the people working on that stuff and give you kind of more of our perspective on what's going on.
Great, thanks a lot.
And by the way, when we do an exhibition, we don't sort of go cold turkey when the exhibition ends. So every time we do an exhibit, it leaves an imprint on whatever we do forever. So we expect that this will be a part of our offerings way beyond the exhibition.
Oh, that's great. I did not know that. That's awesome.
Hi, thank you for coming. I also didn't make it to the exhibition yet, but I heard your comments earlier about this little lapse of computer history in New York in the 1990s and how it came back. I wanted to ask about what kind of, certainly it's true when we think about internet. All the internet-based computer history was made out west and came back to New York. But computational finance, for example, has mostly been in New York because of the central position of New York in the financial markets, and to a lesser degree Chicago and London, I guess, but certainly not out west, I think. So what kind of flavors of computer history are you representing in the exhibition? What kind of weights are you getting to each one?
Yeah, well, business was, even though Thomas Watson Sr. came out of a marketing and sales background, he was at National Cash Registers. I guess that was NCR, the original NCR, and then IBM was International Business Machines. And we do focus very, very heavily in the exhibition on the kind of companionship between business in New York, focus on business in New York, and the need for business machines, the need for computers to support business. And there are people, what we basically decided was, look, the 1980s is so much more of a West Coast story in terms of innovation, where really, we're not going to, there are people who have argued with me, and they're right, that, it's not like we fell off the charts completely, but that really, we just decided that the 1980s was not the New York story. And we decided that we would cover the 1990s in a film, which actually Fred Wilson persuaded me to do, because he said without the venture capital, even if it was venture capital to support the computer industry in on the West Coast, what was happening on the West Coast, it was still coming from New York. And in the 1990s, companies like J.P. Morgan, their largest segment of investment was going into the tech industry in the 1990s. So we didn't abandon the 1990s completely. I mean, you're right. You're right. We could have gone straight through. And business and technological innovation have always been, I mean, we do make that point. When you come to the exhibition, you'll see we do make that point. But then again, in the present time, there are so many other directions that technology has gone in New York that though business is still extremely important, technology has developed in ways that are completely independent of what's going on in Wall Street. And Wall Street isn't a geographical location anymore anyway, so.
Hasn't been for a long, long time.
Yeah, right.
But,
I mean, there's a name on the street, but, it's much more diffuse now.
no, I mean, to this idea about there's being so many parts of technology that are uniquely New York. One of the sharpest CTOs I know is, who has a whole bunch of interesting problems in distributed computing, is the CTO of Rent the Runway. And it seems to me like that seems to me to be kind of New York in such a
Right.
great way.
Yeah,
right? It's kind
that
of,
is terrific. Right.
it's finance and it's fashion.
Yeah, no, that's great. Great example.
So you've come back a few times to the issues surrounding the sort of flight from the city and the Ford to New York drop-dead era.
Right.
And it seems also that sort of the tech renaissance coincides with the reemergence of the city as a desirable place and people moving back. So I was curious, with the rise now of virtual reality and telepresence and self-driving cars, how do you see those things impacting things going forward? Do you think it'll somehow help concentrate things? Do you think it'll diffuse things again, or kind of won't matter that much to the city?
No, I mean, I think you're right. New York is back, and I think it really is back. And I think all of those innovations, I think the idea that you could have a driverless car in New York is so appealing, unbelievably appeling.
I think it beats the drivered cars I've seen in many
Right.
cases in New York. Yeah.
Make it happen now. But I do think, I think New York has come back. It's really not a coincidence. We had leadership in the city. Certainly beginning with the Giuliani administration, which was very focused on making New York a safe place again. No accident that he had a career as a prosecutor, and that's where he decided to put his eggs. And then we had 3 terms of Michael Bloomberg, who was very, very focused on enhancing the city's reputation and ability as a center for technology, including creating a whole new campus that resides right here in this building right now. And I think it would be a great pity, given that campus will be opening, I think, in a couple of years.
Next year, I think.
In 1 year. I was saying with William before, I'm watching it. I live actually across the river from it, so I'm watching it out of my bedroom window as it grows and sprawls. I think that we have bet with that campus and with your presence here and with everything that's happening, we've really bet on the future of New York as a center. So I think that will only thrive. I mean, we don't know. I think what the 1964 World's Fair told us was that we really have no idea what the future is going to bring. But I've always bet on New York, and I would continue to bet on New York.
So your comment about Cornell Technion is a perfect segue to what I was going to ask about, which is you've mentioned Stanford a few times, and you're an alumna. And of course, Stanford was a big part of why Silicon Valley happened in Palo Alto, and Stanford Research Park and HP and so on.
Right.
What do you think the role has been of, we have fantastic universities here, Columbia, NYU, and further afield, well, obviously CUNY in the city, but
Right.
further afield, Princeton
Right.
and Yale and so on. has been the role there? Could they have had more of an impact as Stanford did on the West Coast? And what do you think, looking forward, especially with Cornell Technion, what's the role for them going forward?
Well, it's another really great question. I was the provost for the CUNY system for 7 years before I took my job at the New York Historical Society, and the view at CUNY was that great engineering had really been coming out, particularly of City College, for a very long time. City College had a lot of collaborations with Columbia. NYU had an engineering school, but we closed it, I guess, is the short form, because it's true. So there have been great opportunities, I think, and there have been. I think Columbia and City were pioneers in robotics and did a lot of work. Princeton, obviously, great examples. But they haven't been Stanford, and they haven't, I think it just goes back to, I was an academic for most of my career, and I think that there has been a sense among East Coast academic institutions that it's a little bit, how can I say this politely, it's just not right to have commercial academic partnerships. And I think Stanford's great strength was to, sort of pioneer encouraging that. And so I think, maybe it's fair to say that New York institutions focused more on culture, more on the humanities. They withdrew a little bit with the closing of NYU School of Engineering. They withdrew from engineering. They didn't see the opportunities. I mean, you look at the, corridor, Boston, MIT, for example. I think, it's probably fair to say that New York did lose ground. Could we have had a homegrown, relied on the institutions already in the city to have had a homegrown, Cornell Technion institution, maybe, but there's always excitement around something new and different, and PR means a lot. It means a huge amount. We spend a lot of money on advertising at New York Historical, so I'm the first person to announce things to the world. We're doing, we've changed our business, is very useful. So, so I think that the addition of a new campus focused on technology is a good thing.
Yeah, I wonder, do you think it's possible that some of those universities had a bit of the innovator's dilemma class of problem? When I worked at Columbia, they've received a lot of technology transfer and IP revenue from stuff coming out of the medical school, and as a result, there was an institutional bias towards pharma and the relationships one has with pharma and medical device companies. Mm-hmm. And do you think it's possible that there were situations like that positioned us poorly as a city for this newer computing industry?
I think that's a really good point. And now thinking back, that was really the main event, I would say, for at City College was medical, were medical devices. So, so you're right about that. I hate to say it, but I think it's probably true that we just really weren't thinking, notwithstanding the fact that Bloomberg started here and was as a company, was a huge innovator in all respects. Really, in every respect. I think we just really, probably missed the boat a little bit.
I think maybe one last question, then we should let Louise get a drink of water or something like that.
What did you wish you could have fit into this exhibition that you weren't able to include?
Gee, a lot. There are really a lot of things that we would have liked to talk about but didn't have the space to do. We would have liked to have done a whole arcade of games that were because that was a part of New York's history. We have one game that you can play, Space Invaders, which was invented here, and it's a lot of fun. But I think my colleagues and I, we would have loved to have had the chance to recreate the energy and excitement of New York when, you know, that was like a big thing and a big focus of social, you know, sort of collection of people in the city. We would have loved to have done that. We also would have loved to have had much more around art and culture. We would have loved to have had a whole gallery showing some of the great art that really speaks to what computers brought to contemporary art. You know, would have loved to have done those kinds of things. But you know, I mean, all things being equal, we would have loved to have incorporated one of our Google classrooms into the exhibitions. And we are, by the way, tonight we're launching a drop-in. We're using our classrooms. Friday night we're pay as you wish, which, as the person who counts the money, I can tell you people don't, you know, pay as you wish means you don't have to pay a lot. But because we're usually flooded with visitors Friday night as a result of you know, our openness, we want to make the museum open to anyone, whether they can pay admission or not, basically. But we are allowing people to drop in on our Google classrooms and learn coding. So it would have, you know, would have been nice to have had that embedded right into the exhibition. So, you know, people would have had the proximity to what's here and now. But yeah, I could go on forever. Thanks.
Hey, so Louise, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, and thank you again.
And go to the New York Historical Society and pay full admission, please.